Hi folks, this video is an explanation of parts 2 and 3 of your research paper. So basically representing different perspectives on the topic that you've chosen. So what this section boils down to is argumentative writing, but it's kind of unique argumentative writing because you're not representing your personal opinion, you're representing the opinion of a entire kind of group or people that may or may not share your views. So specifically kind of what we're going to look for are some of the same ideas that we would in traditional research argumentative papers. Number one, that you are creating a coherent argument on the specific topic, that you're developing claims and supplying reasoning and evidence for ideas. And remember, these not necessarily your ideas, but you have to supply evidence and reasoning as Group A or Group B would. It's helpful to point out strengths and limitations of these ideas, and then we're going to work on clarifying the relationships between claims and reasons and evidence. Basically meaning our paragraphs have to make sense, and we have to properly express, like, here's what people believe and here's why they believe it. And we're still going to have an introduction and concluding statement in these brief perspective overviews. So our overall goal is for each of these sections of our research papers to write a 1 to 2 page essay explaining a perspective on a topic. So you may agree or disagree with this argument. So for example, one of my example papers is gun control. You may be a strong advocate of gun control, or you may be a strong opponent of gun control. You have to show me that you understand each side of this perspective without putting yourself into it, right? So I need to be able to read both of these sections, and I could take your paper and put it in front of someone who either believes or doesn't believe in gun control, and they would say, yes, that is my argument. You nailed it. There's no personal opinion in this. And so we have to be kind of careful with the language that we use. So you might be using some more ambiguous language, like some people argue blank, or supporters of blank believe. Um, Sentence starters like that. And ultimately what this is doing is it's strengthening your personal conclusion, which will be the last thing that you write. Because if you can show that you understand both sides, when it comes time to like presenting your case, you can say, I really do understand both sides of the argument. I've researched them both, and here's why I'm landing on what I'm landing, and here's why my idea is valid and credible. All right, so the structure is going to be pretty similar. So this should be just kind of a review over a basic argument structure. So we should have an introduction to each one of these perspectives, give some background about, okay, what's important, what's relevant in understanding a person's perspective who believes in this. And then ultimately you're going to end with a thesis, but it's not necessarily like your thesis arguable statement. It's kind of, here's what this group of people with this perspective believe. So again, back to my gun control example. A bad example of this would be some people don't like gun control. That's not specific, right? I still want you to practice the idea of creating a good specific thesis and representing here's what other people believe. So this is a much better thesis is opponents of gun control argue that law-abiding citizens, including hunters and gun sportsmen, have a right to self-defense, that the current laws on gun control are appropriate, and that right is guaranteed by the Second Amendment. So I've got a nice specific thesis of what people believe and why they believe it, and it's kind of framing, here's what the rest of the argument and section of this paper is going to look like, right? Because I've got right to self-defense, current gun control laws are appropriate, and they're going to talk about the Second Amendment. All right, so then we get into those body paragraphs explaining these three pieces and parts. And body paragraphs, again, are going to look really, really similar. Each body paragraph is going to start off with a claim, usually a topic sentence that connects to the thesis. We're going to provide evidence, and when I say evidence, I mean context for the evidence, an introduction to the evidence, a quote or a paraphrase, and a proper citation, right? You're not just going to drop in a quote and be like, there's my evidence. No, you've got to explain where this evidence is coming from. You've got to maybe provide some background information. Then you've got to give me your quote and your citation. So this is going to be your actual research, your real world examples, your references that you found in your research, using your notes. And then lastly, you're going to provide some reasoning or analysis. You're never going to have a piece of evidence without analyzing it and explaining, here's what this means. And so remember, you're doing this in a way that's not saying, here's what I believe, but you're saying, here's why people believe that this piece of evidence, this quote or this example goes back to prove their point. So it's got to connect back to the topic sentence for this, and ultimately back to the arguments whatever perspective you're on, whatever their main claim is. And then lastly, or I guess second to last, you could include a counterclaim in this section of your paper. You don't necessarily need to, since you're going to be fully explaining both sides of the argument, but it could be helpful. So for example, I could include a line like this. So supporters of gun control believe that while the Constitution grants the right to bear arms, that shall not be infringed upon, that this does not mean limitless and unregulated access to all types of weapons, right? In that, we're saying here's how Group A might respond to Group B, but in there, you're still not seeing any of my opinion, right? You couldn't tell if I'm a supporter of gun control or an opponent of gun control. I'm just trying to keep an objective view on how do these two groups interact and what might their arguments be against each other. And then lastly, really briefly, this doesn't have to be anything long. You're going to sum up this side's argument and kind of explain so what. So why do people who have this perspective believe this is important or the right way to view the world today? Don't go crazy. Conclusions don't have to be super long, at least in this section of your paper. Maybe 3-4 sentences would be plenty. All right, for my visual folks, here's what this might look like, where we've got an introduction and our main claim or a thesis of each perspective. And then we're going to have a couple claims about here's why people with this perspective believe their main claim with some evidence and some reasoning. And each claim that you have might have one or even two pieces of evidence and reasoning. And that's how that works. All right. I do have some examples posted up on this assignment where you can take a look at here's how this plays out in actual research papers, both my example as well as a student exemplar research paper. So make sure you're taking a look at those and kind of formatting your structure on those examples. Holler if you have questions.